Hi! Welcome back to Grace Has a Lot of Feelings About Stuff That No One Else Cares About. On this episode, I rip off another YouTuber. I really loved the whole concept behind YMS's childhood trauma series. Making a list about stuff that scared the piss out of you as a child, and then talking about it and trying to figure out what exactly about it scared you. It made me think a lot about my childhood and about the stuff that scared me, and it made me go to some really deep recesses in my mind that I didn't even know were there. I also just like to talk about myself. So, like YMS, none of the things I'm going to be talking about are really in any particular order, except for the last one. The last one is the one that scared me the most as a kid. But I am going to be starting off with something that didn't so much scare me as a child as it did disturb me. It's basically impossible to sell anybody on the Warrior series. Either you were captivated by the cat books at the Scholastic Book Fair, or you weren't. And most people I know weren't. And it's really hard to describe the series because there's about 80 books now, and there's over 1,300 characters. They are making a live-action Warriors movie because of course they are, and that's so funny to me. You know how when Watership Down came out, people were complaining about how violent it was for a kids movie?
The field, it's covered with blood.
I am going to take the controversial stance that Warriors is way more brutal than Watership Down. There's this part in one of the earlier books where a cat scoops out another cat's insides, and that cat bleeds to death slowly on the ground 9 times.
He's dying 9 times.
I'm going to have to say that the 5th book, A Dangerous Path, probably has the most amount of brutal shit happening in it, except for maybe the book where a bunch of cats crawl out of hell and start killing the living. Not a joke, by the way. The thing is that book didn't come out till I was about 16, and I read A Dangerous Path when I was about 11. In this one book alone, a kitten is taken by a hawk, one cat is ripped to shreds by a pack of dogs while his friend's face is chewed off, yet another cat gets murdered and used to make the dogs crave blood, and then one of the main characters forces the dogs over a cliff and falls to her death. Yay! Live-action children's movie! Another fucked up children's series I read was A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. Something about the way it was written just appealed to me, you know? I will never forget when I was 7 years old and I read the part where Lemony Snicket was explaining how you should never ever 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 ever
ever ever ever ever ever ever ever ever ever ever ever fiddle around in any way with electric devices.
Plenty of other children's series were dark or had dark moments, but A Series of Unfortunate Events was pitch black. Uncle Marty's death was traumatizing enough, but then at the end of that book, there was one line that completely threw me for a loop.
Gustav is dead. One day, when he was out collecting wildflowers, I drowned him in the swarthy swamp.
As a 7-year-old, it just didn't occur to me that you could drown a person. I thought that drowning was something that happened when you went in the water and you couldn't swim. And I ended up forming this very vivid image in my head where Count Olaf grabbed the assistant by his head and just started dunking him in the water repeatedly over and over again until he stopped breathing. The Netflix series really kind of let me down in this regard. The third book fucked me up in a similar way. All throughout the third book, Aunt Josephine was talking about how there's leeches in the lake and it ate her husband alive, and how her worst fear is getting eaten alive by the leeches. And then, at the end of the third book, she gets eaten alive by the leeches. It wasn't even the eaten alive part that scared me. It was the dying via your worst fear. That's just a horrifying thing to think of when you're a child. I legitimately remembered a scene where she was ripped to shreds, as screaming, bleeding as the orphans were forced to watch, but when I read the third book a couple years ago, I was shocked to find that didn't happen. She definitely got eaten alive, don't get me wrong. It is heavily implied that is what happened, but we never actually see it.
The boat was already quite a ways from Aunt Josephine, and the orphans could only see the white of her hands as she waved them over the dark water. She has a chance, Violet said quietly to Klaus as they sailed toward the dock.
Turns out I scared myself. So badly, in fact, that when I was about maybe 12, my mom put on the Series of Unfortunate Events movie in our living room, and then when it got to that scene, I ran and I hid in the attic because I was too afraid to watch it.
Well, you get the picture.
That also happened with the Haunted Mask episode of Goosebumps. The Haunted Mask is definitely considered to be one of the scarier of the Goosebump episodes, but it's been analyzed to the moon and back by Ryan Hollinger, and also YMS talked about it in his childhood trauma series. So I'm not really going to talk about it much, but I am going to say that the scene that most people cite as being the one that scared them. Come on. I didn't even get that far. I ran and hid in the attic when this happened.
Help me. Talked. Please help me.
I'm a giant coward. I don't know what to say. And speaking of me being a giant coward, you just really don't notice how cheap something looks when you're a kid, do you? In my defense, I didn't really find the game as a whole scary. It was just one little moment at the very beginning of the game. Help! I thought that Velma's cousin got fucking murdered. The camera pans down and her glasses are just lying on the floor, broken. I thought that that meant that she was dead. And it took me a couple days to finish this game, so I was having nightmares that the mystery gang were gonna open up a sarcophagus and her body was going to just fall out of it. But then I got to the end of the game and she's perfectly fine, and she's wearing her perfectly intact glasses.
Boy, am I glad to see you, Cousin Velma.
Alright, so next is the cell block Tango.
He had it coming. He had it coming.
Don't even bother subscribing, honestly. I don't know how old I was when I heard the song, but I did hear the song. I didn't watch Chicago. I still haven't seen Chicago, but for what it's worth, I really do like the cell block Tango now. It goes hard as fuck, and I appreciate that. But to put this in context for you, we were at my little sister's dance recital, and they were playing songs from like The Lion King and Barney. And then the instructors came out on stage and decided that they were going to perform. The 6 or so instructors came out on stage, dressed all sexy. The cell block Tango started to play, which these are all weird choices for a dance recital meant for toddlers, but okay. I will never forget the moment where the first instructor, melving along to the song, said the line,
"So I took the shotgun off the wall and I fired 2 warning shots into his head."
And then my mom, sitting next to me, just screamed, "Woohoo!" So there I sat for the next 5 or so minutes, in between my parents, my mom being weirdly into it for some reason, watching the dance instructors do interpretive dances about murdering their husbands, and then a few hours later when we went to go grab my little sister who was waiting for us in the back, she was literally like, "Is mommy going to kill daddy?" So, thanks for that. Speaking of murdering your significant other, Monk! I feel like most people my age don't know about Monk, and the reason I think that is because whenever I bring it up, most people think I'm talking about actual monks. This was probably my mom's favorite show, and it was always on in my house. For the most part, that wasn't a big deal. Like, as far as murder shows go, Monk is definitely one of the more lighthearted ones.
Ready. And go!
But every so often, there would just be a moment, like like a little tiny moment where it just kind of fucked me up a little bit. The cold open of Mr. Monk Goes to the Ball Game features a couple following their GPS as they drive to a hotel, and the GPS leading them into an empty lot in the middle of nowhere.
Where the hell are we?
Turns out that some guy had hacked into the GPS earlier in the night, and he approaches the car as it pulls up and shoots them both to death.
Thank you for using the Safe Voyage system.
GPSs are a piece of technology that are literally designed to be followed without question, and the idea that somebody could just hack into one and then take you somewhere isolated so they can murder you is something I think about now every time I use my GPS. So hey, good job, Monk. You managed to get me scared of technology before Black Mirror ever got the chance. Oh, and also, in case the summary of this sounds familiar, Local 58 has a video with essentially the same premise. That's also pretty scary. You should check it out.
At east for 1/4 of a mile, then follow signs for do not enter.
Next up is Lucy's death scene in Harper's Island. I've already made an entire video about Harper's Island, but it's basically unwatchable, so I'm just going to sum up this scene here. Fire bad. Okay. So, aside from the fact that burning hurts, I think the thing that got to me the most was just how emotionless and cruel this was. The killer walks up, doesn't acknowledge Lucy trying to call to him.
Is there someone up there?
Pours gasoline on her, and then lights her on fire, casually, without a thought. You could literally just be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and you will die a slow and painful death, and you can't do anything to prevent it. Yeah! 'Cause you had a bad day. And speaking of slow and painful deaths, Disney! The joke here is that Disney is basically causing the apocalypse right now and is slowly strangling the entertainment industry from the inside out. My grandparents lived in Florida, so I probably went to Disney World about 5 or 6 times as a young child. There's a lot of scary rides at Disney World. I can talk about any of those, and people would nod along and say, "Oh yeah, I understand, that ride scared me too." I'm sure if I went on the Great Movie Ride as an adult, I would have loved it. Come on with the rain. I would have gotten all the old movie references. I would have found the gangster hijacking the ride to be charming. But I didn't go on this ride when I was an adult. I went on this ride when I was like 6. I had never seen a gangster movie when I was 6. I didn't understand why we were being shot at. Oh, to be a youth in a post-Columbine America. And then, holy shit, one of the people with guns is kidnapping us. Everybody just sits like, and oh my god, we're going into Alien? I am sure that there are plenty of kids who got traumatized by watching Alien, but I went into it. I went into the movie and I was this close to the xenomorph. And then after that, we went into Indiana Jones, and the gangster that kidnapped us gets dead. Which scared me too, but I was just relieved that the person holding us hostage was dead at that point. Our old tour guide was back, and we turned the corner, and it's the Wizard of Oz. Ugh, I love the Wizard of Oz. You know, as a kid, I wasn't scared of the Wicked Witch of the West until she was 7 feet tall and right in front of me. So, yeah, from the perspective of a young child, this ride is literally just being dragged from one nightmare scenario to another nightmare scenario. I'm actually really bitter that they closed this ride, because watching ride-throughs of it, it actually seems to be really cute and clever and charming, but my only memories of it are just being fucking terrified the entire time, and that's the only way I'm ever gonna remember it. Thanks, Disney. And speaking of terrifying rides, has anyone ever heard of Clark's Trading Post? You guys know Clark's Trading Post, right? It's a little theme park in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. They have trained bears that I'm just going to trust aren't being abused. And some museums, and that's really all there is to it, aside from a handful of rides.
Look at the road. The whole room is upside down.
One of the rides is the Wolfman train. You get on this train and you take a nice little ride into the beautiful forests of New Hampshire. You go past the Pemmisaquasset River, look at the White Mountains. Imagine the old man of the mountain is still up there and feel a single tear slide down your cheek. And then a feral man runs out of the woods with a gun.
I got a gun! Look at all the kids! Look at the freaking kid! Pick up the gun! Look at him! Really?
Oh, the joys of being a youth in a post-cult. I hit the deck. I'm not even kidding. When he came out of the woods firing that gun, I slammed myself down onto the floor of the train, covered my head, and screamed the entire train ride. Looking at the footage online, I felt really dumb.
Hey, let's do the wolf cheer, okay? Wolf, wolf, W-L-L, wolf, he's the best. I know about your Twitter and your book face and your Pokemon Go.
But then my sister told me that the original Wolfman apparently died in 2015, so I did a little bit of digging and went back a few years.
Boiled kids with skunk cabbage and rat tails. That's my favorite.
Oh yeah, here he is. Here's the man who haunted my nightmares.
You ever come back alive, your lives will never be the same again. You will live in nightmares for the rest of your lives.
New Hampshire's a trash state. Don't come here. Alright, so here's the big one. Here's the thing that absolutely ruined my life as a child. It created several phobias, such as the woods, nighttime, night in the woods, sharp objects, being home alone. It was also the first horror movie I ever watched. You guys ever hear of Cherry Falls?
Cherry Falls.
Did you want your first time to be something beautiful, something romantic?
No one I know has ever heard of this thing. It never got a theatrical release in the US due to issues with the MPAA, but it was eventually purchased by USA Network. So as a result, it actually holds the record for being the most expensive TV movie in existence. My childhood best friend put it on when I was over her house one day. She knew what it was, I didn't, and she didn't tell me what it was. I had never seen a horror movie before, so when this happened, it knocked the fucking air out of me.
Oh my God.
Around the time that I watched this, my mom was just starting to leave me home alone for short periods of time.
Who is it?
There was a lot of paranoia about strangers and people kidnapping children and stuff like that.
Hi, Annette.
Yeah?
It's Laura Lee Sherman.
Excuse me?
And my mom always told me that if the doorbell rings to never ever answer it, because there's going to be a stranger on the other side who's going to ask me if I'm home alone.
Is your mom home?
No.
And then something bad will happen. So this scene ruined my life. I didn't even finish this scene. I ran and hid in a closet. And then after that, I told my friend's mom that I wanted to go home. But The damage was done. I refused to be home alone for years after that. I actually started sleeping with the light on for a little while just because the idea that there was stabbies hiding in the dark woods, which my house was surrounded by woods, by the way. Yeah, it was a great time in my life, but I just kind of moved past it. Up until I was in college. That was when I discovered the movie Sin City.
This is bad days.
And I was immediately just enamored with Brittany Murphy. I fell so deeply in love with Brittany Murphy.
Jackie boy, it's a regular African love fest in here.
And then I found out she was dead. So I was on her Wikipedia page and I was scrolling through it, and then I saw, oh God. Wait, slasher comedy? My life got ruined by a comedy? Okay. You guys know how after Scream came out, there was just a huge influx of slasher movies trying to be witty and self-aware in order to cash in on its success? Cherry Falls was one of those.
You haven't heard about Rod and Stacy?
Did they break up?
Break up! Wake up! They're dead!
But it was slightly more clever than all the other knockoffs. Slightly. The entire premise of Cherry Falls is a subversion of the old trope that all the naughty bad kids having sex are gonna get killed off by the killer.
We weren't doing anything. We were just messing around.
But all the good, pure virgins get to live till the end of the movie. In Cherry Falls, the killer is specifically targeting virgins.
So what better to deprive them of the only innocence they have left? Their precious, virginal children.
And all the teenagers in the town have sex in order to survive.
Work it out that your attacker has this thing for virgins. So everyone's decided to take themselves off the endangered species list and have sex.
And by sex, I mean dog pile. That's a funny I like that concept. I didn't know horror tropes when I was 8-ish. I didn't have any reason to believe that there was anything funny about this. Also, I know that this clip looks like he's sexually assaulting his victims, but no, don't worry. The movie makes it very, very clear that he's not.
The hymen was intact. We found no evidence of semen on the clothes, skin, hair, mouth, or the anus. No abrasions or contusions in the pubic region. In fact, no evidence of sexual penetration of any kind. It would appear that your killer has been quite accurate in the application of his signature.
Ugh. Get Better Science movie from 20 years ago. Yeah, some parts of this movie are pretty dated. The killer is a man who dresses like a woman. To be fair, the woman he's dressed as is literally his mother, so maybe it was supposed to be a Psycho reference, but I don't know. There's sort of this uncomfortable emphasis on him painting his nails and putting on makeup.
Why are you wearing lipstick? Because it makes me pretty.
And also, considering that he's the victim's teacher, spoiler alert, it might be easier to kill them if he wasn't in disguise.
It's Laura Lee Sherman.
Excuse me?
Laura Lee Sherman?
I didn't have a bad time watching it though. It's a lot more lighthearted than I remember. There were some scenes that I remembered being completely serious as a kid, but they just aren't.
Once in the 8th grade, I had a fight with Ron, and I told him to fuck off and die.
And there was definite satire that I picked up while I was watching it. Like how the adults are more concerned about their children's virginity than their children dying.
Well, what are we supposed to tell our kids? To go out and get laid if they want to feel safe?
And I think the ending is supposed to be that since the killer was created by a rape being covered up, Brittany Murphy's character continuing to cover up that rape.
And you can think of no reason why Leonard Marston committed these murders.
No.
Means that the killer never actually goes away. Or it's just a sequel tease that didn't work out because I'm the only one who remembers this movie. And look, that's some good shit if I'm right, but it doesn't really go anywhere. The whole subversion of virgins being killed doesn't go anywhere. The stuff with the parents doesn't go anywhere. And none of this stuff is really funny anyways. The only times I really laughed were when something completely absurd happened. I guess I didn't get scarred for life by a comedy after all. There are a few jokes here and there, but you kind of get a sense that they were butchered by the censoring.
This is my post. I can't just split.
It's funny that this was the movie that scarred me for life, because the NPAA is run by whores and they actually had to cut out most of the violence. I wonder if that's why the movie's barely over an hour, even though every place with information on it listed as being over an hour and a half. It's not. So, Rod's death is shown on screen, barely, but Stacy's death is shown in 2-second flashes. Annette's death is completely off screen unless we're supposed to infer that she dies here, which I doubt, but we don't even get to see her corpse for more than a single frame at a time. Why does the camera linger on Stacy's body, but Annette's body can only be shown in quick flashes? Timmy dies off screen, the principal dies off screen. Up until the climax, there's barely any violence. And also, as you can imagine, the NPAA didn't like the dog pile scene very much. Apparently the scene was originally written that the pile was hidden under a large white seat, but the director wanted full-on nudity, and that got this thing slapped with an NC-17. So it got cut down so you barely see any dog pile at all. It's still somehow the best scene in the entire movie.
It's Mr. Violence and he's the killer! Class dismissed!
Honestly, the movie gets amazing after the point that Brittany Murphy finds her dad in a box. God, I miss Brittany Murphy. Watching this movie just made me more sad than anything.
It's so different from any of the other movies, in my opinion, of its genre, that have floated in front of my face in the past couple of years. And I thought, oh, this is cool. This one I actually want to be a part of.
Yeah, I conquered my fear. I can go out into the woods at night again, but now I frequent Brittany Murphy conspiracy boards. So,